So I recently purchased the Canon RF 45mm f1.2 lens that everybody's been talking about. And as I'm sure most of you have heard by now, because it's been discussed by many reviewers of this lens, there is an issue with the autofocus on this lens, especially as you start to stop down. And I knew that going in, but I also knew that it, in most cases, wasn't going to be a major issue. But nonetheless, I wanted to do a test. So the way I did this test is I set the camera up on a tripod, set my spider lens calibration tool up on another tripod, separated them by minimum focus distance, or about 1.5 feet, and then I ran through several apertures from 1.2 to f8. Then I moved the camera further back so that it was now at a 2 times the minimum focal distance, or 3 feet. Did the same test, same set of apertures, and then one more time at 6 feet, or 4 times the minimum focus distance. So without further ado, let me run through these test images and discuss. At f1.2, at minimum focus distance, as you can see here, the 0 is in focus. And by the way, in every shot, I made sure that the focal point was exactly centered right here where the 0 is. Okay, and I was very careful about that. But at f1.2, the 0, which is my desired focal point, is in focus. It appears to be. I mean, it's looks like I've got just about centered where my focal point should be. As I step down to f1.4, my 0 is still in acceptable focus, but you'll notice that the one that's forward of the 0 right here and the one that is behind it are a little bit different. The one in front is a little blurrier than the one in back. It's a little sharper. This suggests that the true focal plane is moving backwards a little bit towards the one. At f1.8, it's continuing to move back, but at f1.8, the depth of field is wide enough that my 0 is still adequately in focus. Okay, so again, I'm focusing on this 0 plane right here. My true focal point is probably about at this half mark, but the 0 is still in focus because of the, the depth of field is wide enough to where it's still adequate. At f2.8, well, the 0 is starting to get a little bit soft. Now, at normal viewing distance, you probably wouldn't even notice it, but it is, starting to show a little bit of softness. And you can also see that the one in front is considerably blurrier than the one behind it. It's much sharper now. So obviously our focal point is continuing to move back. Now, whether this is going to be an issue, for a given image kind of depends on what the subject is and, a lot of other factors, but it is what it is. If I go to f4, and I don't have a little box for the f4, again, it's really starting to move back. I think my true focal point is probably about where the 1 is. And by the way, that doesn't represent a 1 inch shift in the focal plane, because this thing is at an angle. Whoops, let me get back to f4 again. This thing is at an angle, so that when you're talking about going from 0 to 1, that really represents about a 3/8 of an inch shift backwards. Okay, but because at f4 the depth of field is even wider, my 0 is still reasonably well within focus. At f5, the same thing continues to happen. Our focal point continues to move a little bit further back, but at the same time that depth of field is wide enough that our desired point is still in focus. F8, you know, hey, as far as I'm concerned, you know, that 0 is plenty sharp, okay? And the depth of field is wide enough to where even though the true focal point has shifted probably back to where the 2 is, the depth of field is wide enough to where my 0 is still adequately sharp. Okay, so that's all at minimum focus distance. Now, just for grins, let's take a look at twice the minimum focus distance. And I've had to kind of crop in on the image. And by the way, I didn't do any other adjustments other than cropping on any of these images. So at f1.2, now I'm keep in mind I'm at 3 feet from the target now. f1.2, I think everything looks fine. The 0 is as sharp as anything else in the image, so I think that's where my focal point was. I stopped down to f1.4. The 0 is, it's still adequate. It's a little, maybe a tiny bit soft, but you can see the shift in the true focal plane by the fact that this one is blurrier than this one. This one is much sharper than this one. And this trend continues as I go to f8. Now, at f8, at this minimum focal distance, I would say that this 0 is not acceptable anymore. It's outside the depth of field, and I wouldn't consider that in focus now. I think the first thing that's coming into focus is probably the 1. Okay, so there's a little bit of a shift there. So that's noticeable, I think, at that point. By the time I get to f.2 though, the depth of field is opened up wide enough to where the 0 is starting to get a little bit sharper. At f4, it's sharper still. At f5, it's about the same. f6, it's plenty sharp. Okay, I mean f8 rather. Okay, so now let's do one more and take a look at the test shots that were 4 times the minimum focal distance. So here again, and I've had to really crop in on this one because when I was that far away at 45 millimeters, this target was pretty small in the field of view, so I really had to crop in aggressively, about 273% to be exact. But I was still zooming in each time and trying to really nail the focus right where I wanted at the center here. f1.2, I think it looks okay. I start to stop down to f1.4, f1.8 again. At f1.8, I start getting pretty blurry on that 0. f2.8, it's still a little blurry, but it's better. At f4, I think it's back to being usable again. f5.6, it's considerably sharper. And f8, Bob's your uncle, it's almost perfect. Okay, so what do I conclude from all of this? Well, here's what I think is happening and what it means practically. The closer you are to the subject, the more prominent or pronounced the issue is going to appear, because when your subject is closer, your depth of field is narrower, and so any shift in the focal point is going to be more noticeable. Does that make sense? I hope. But then as I go to 2 times the minimum focal distance and then 4 times I'm sure you know that as you get further from your subject, the depth, the actual depth of field and what will be in focus at any given aperture is going to grow. Okay, so in most cases, I don't think this issue is going to be a real issue, but I think if you're shooting stuff closer and you start stopping down from f1.2, that's where you're going to start maybe seeing some issues. Now, as you get past a certain point on the aperture, the depth of field is going to be, continue to grow as you stop down. and so that your point, it basically is going to be like your point, like a bell curve. You start off nice and sharp where your focal point is. As you start stopping down, you start getting a little bit less perfect in your focus, but then as you continue to stop down, you start getting better and better, and that's because of the fact that the depth of field is widening. So I hope this is helpful to anybody who's either considering getting this lens or has already bought it. Also keep in mind that on the newer cameras, they say that there's a setting in there, and I can't remember what it is, but there's plenty of videos about it. But there is a setting on the newer cameras that you can set that compensates for this little issue. In the meantime, you can, if you really are trying to take a picture of something close up and you want to really nail the focus where you want it, I would say just give your manual focus ring a tweak. Okay? Hope this is helpful, and I found it rather interesting. Talk to you later.